Okay, so I've got a tutorial up on YouTube that covers general saber effects that you know how to do. The way I'm going about the glow might be a bit different. I'm just duplicating the layers a bunch of times and adding an incrementally increasing Gaussian blur. As you can see, this top one's spread out to 1,000 blurriness as a value, and they kind of get walked down from there. So if you want to see that, I'm not sure how much different methods of glow generation is going to affect this. In theory, it shouldn't. But basically, what I did is these two layers, which are basically standing in as like a core layer for me, are and actually the most important thing to do is set this to screen with the effect that I'm going to be doing. But I think the main thing here is to turn off layers that stand in as your core because we're not really trying to have a core go on top. It's not really an overlay effect. We're more enhancing the blade that's there and then putting a glow around it. So I disabled those and then I add a gradient ramp and I track the start color to the front of our, the hilt of our weapon, and then the end color is at the top. The end color, you can play with this to fine tune it. Basically, this is going to set how far up the blade you want the glow to go and how soon do you want that kind of fanning, blurry transparency effect to take over. So it's a bit different of a result than what I was getting in Nuke. I do plan on doing a tutorial in Nuke in a month or so, just when I can kind of, when work settles down, I can sit down and get that out. There's a free version of it. It's only thing is it's limited to HD output. It's a really helpful tool. It's a super powerful compositing software. I got it and have not used After Effects in a while because of it. But basically, now that we've got this gradient ramp, we're getting some of that transparency to take back over. The next thing I was doing is I disable this. I've got three other things going on. So the first one is this single solid white layer here set to screen. It also has a white to black gradient ramp. That was just kind of covering up the lack of glow in the edges of our emitter. It's kind of like a little hilt kick for the effect. Next up, I did an exposure increase, and this you can also dial in. This is going to also affect the transparency of your blade here. If I turn this off, it's a pretty transparent effect, which is cool. If you want to give it a little bump here, you totally can. Now, the tip of my blade I saw was not, it doesn't have a light in it, so it's not picking up and you can really tell. So I tinted everything black and white, and then I brought in a color balance and a color balance HLS to just try to flatten it out a bit. Not perfect. It's a lot closer. So you can kind of see the difference there. And I think the exposure kind of helps blend that gap as well. And then I have a Gaussian blur effect as well being put on top of the blade. And for these adjustment layers, I'm just using my roto for the sabers. Reason being is I felt like the prop itself was just a bit too sharp, and I just wanted to kind of dull things out. It's also helping the transition into this tip point here. Let's see, I didn't cut off the roto, but we'll just play this down. So it's not exactly the same. I think it's pretty close. You can, dial things in, dropping that exposure down maybe a bit. 1.5. You can also mess with the value in your gradient ramps here in your pre-comp for the saber glow. Maybe that's where it's at. Basically, you just the core theme here is that you don't work with a core inside of your saber glow, and you drive a gradient ramp to have the glow weaken as it gets closer to the tip of your blade. From there, it's going to be a shot to shot, lighting condition to lighting condition blending. And that's where things might fall apart following the exact same tutorial and steps. So I'm just kind of giving an overview of the process. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm happy with this. It's not always the most transparent, but that's not about creating transparency. It's about letting it behave naturally in the scene. And so, if you disable everything, it is a lot more transparent, but we're also deciding that this effect is brighter than the prop that we have in scene. And so that kind of justifies our reasoning there. You can mess with the glow fall off, maybe it's a bit strong, so you just widen this one out to weaken it. Something else you can do as well, not sure exactly how this will work in After Effects, but in Nuke you can blur things out in X and Y, maybe directional blur might be a thing to do, and you blur out crazy in your across the Y plane. I guess that's the cap for directional blur. Let's see if we can't keep it going with a second one. We can. Okay, so then just duplicate this a couple more times and then blur it out a little bit, not as much in the X, or excuse me, in Y. So blur it out like crazy in X, not as much in Y. This was just something I picked up that gives a soft kind of like squeeze to the effect. And this you're gonna want to dial in the opacity. Shouldn't be at 100. It creates kind of a anamorphic-esque pinch to your saber glow. Yeah, that's you'll dial it into what feels right to you in the scene. Just kind of helps give it that wider, fuller feel to it. And yeah, let's see it down. And maybe that's something you have to keyframe when it swings wide. Maybe it gets a little too much in the intensity, but that's essentially the effect as a breakdown.